Welcome to the Spark Live webinar series, one component of our Spark Knowledge Mobilization Program. Spark is Children's Healthcare Canada's shared platform for advocacy, research, and knowledge. Spark Live is where we gather each week to curate, convene, and showcase excellence and innovation from across the child and youth healthcare community. Our goal is to spark conversation, ideas, and action. Children's Healthcare Canada would like to thank our funding partners for their ongoing contributions that support all of our programs and activities, including this Spark Live bi-weekly webinar series. There are two options to join in on the live conversation. Questions and comments for our panel or presenters can be typed into the question box, or comments that you want to share with the audience can be typed into the chat box visible to all of our attendees. For those of you on Twitter, tag @ChildHealthCan on any webinar-related tweets or use the hashtag SparkLive. And to keep up to date on all of Children's Healthcare Canada's webinars and other activities, be sure to sign up for our weekly Spark News e-bulletin by visiting our website at childhealthcan.ca. Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Children's Healthcare Canada's Spark Live webinar series. The Spark theme for this May is Child Health Across the Continuum of Care, and I'm Paula Robeson, your host for the next hour. Children's Healthcare Canada acknowledges that our offices, located in Ottawa, are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions that Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening this community, our province, and the country. We're delighted today to speak with Carrie Costello and Dr. Annette Meinemer to explore parent partners as investigators on a Child Bright research project. Before we begin, we invite you to answer a few quick poll questions for us. Please note you'll have to answer all three of these questions to submit a response. We want to thank you so much for participating. The information you share helps us greatly. While you're completing the poll, I'll introduce our speakers today. Annette Meinemer is professor at the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill University and a senior scientist at the Research Institute of McGill University Health Centre. She's a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences and co-editor of the Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics. Annette's research interests focus primarily on the early identification of children at high risk for disability and the intrinsic and extrinsic factors that influence outcomes in children and youth with developmental disabilities. She's also studying knowledge translation strategies that promote best practice for children with developmental challenges. She currently leads the Child Bright Network, a pan-Canadian patient-oriented research network focused on children with brain-based developmental disabilities. And Carrie Costello is the parent of three wonderful children aged 15, 11, and 8. And her middle daughter, Ale, has a profound intellectual disability and a seizure disorder. Her family has spent a lot of time navigating the child health and disability world, and she brings that experience to her work with parents and families in research. Carrie works as a parent liaison with Child Bright Research Network and supports parents and researchers involved in 12 pan-Canadian multi-year research projects. She's the patient engagement coordinator at the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba and works to include parents, caregivers, and patients as part of the research team. She has also been a partner, collaborator, and co-investigator and co-primary investigator on over 10 different research projects. During this presentation, we welcome you to converse in the chat box and type your questions in the Q&A box, which we will pose to you at the end of the webinar. And it's now my pleasure to pass the mic to Annette.
Thanks, Paula. It's really our pleasure to be able to participate in the Children's Healthcare Canada webinar series and to share our experiences partnering with parents in our research project. So Canadian Institutes of Health Research has a SPORE program, or Strategies for Patient-Oriented Research, that aims to transform the role of a patient from a passive recipient of services and participant in a research project to a proactive partner who helps to shape health research and transform our healthcare system. The concept of patient-oriented research is fairly new, but is certainly gaining more interest in the last 5 to 10 years. In patient-oriented research, patients are engaged as active, authentic partners in research teams and participate in all aspects of the research cycle, from identifying patient priorities to ensure that the research is relevant, to all phases of the cycle, with the important focus that we're improving patient outcomes that are most important and impactful. And by ensuring that the research is relevant to patients, feasible, applicable, once the knowledge is generated by this team, we are hoping that this will result in a more rapid uptake and use of this information in healthcare by healthcare practitioners, and really to change and improve the healthcare system. So patients as partners. Why include patients? Well, patients bring a very different knowledge to the research team based on their lived experience of the health condition and their navigation through the healthcare system. So by having that complementary knowledge, it really enhances the opportunities for creativity and innovation and potential for impact. When we talk about patients, for child health research, we're talking about youth with the health condition, but more often parents of children with the health condition, given that as caregivers, they are part of that journey with the patient. So patients can be caregivers, for example, and for us, it's often parents that act as partners in that research. Parent partners have been involved in all phases of our research projects, to begin with the research question, developing the protocol, so looking at the design of the study, the recruitment strategies, the data collection methods, determining the intervention, outcome measures, and analysis. It also includes dissemination strategies, so traditional methods such as publication. They may be co-authors or at least acknowledged for their work, depending on what their interest is in terms of getting involved in publications, but also various presentations such as this one today. But also our patient partners have pushed us to disseminate in more non-traditional ways, to really reach out to different target users using blogs, policy briefs, social media. And that's been a very important piece in terms of knowledge mobilization. So Child Bright is one of the SPORE, or Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research networks, funded by CIHR, and it's focusing on children with brain-based developmental disabilities and their families. And so today we'd like to give an example of a research project called Bright Coaching, which is one of the projects. And really, when we started these projects in 2016, most of our researchers really had very little experience doing patient-oriented research and working very closely with parent partners. So what do we mean by Bright Coaching? So this is an intervention, coaching program that's delivered virtually to empower families of preschoolers with suspected developmental delays. So these are children that, as they begin to develop around 18 months to 4 years, some developmental delays begin to emerge, and parents are put on wait lists for diagnosis. And even if they have a diagnosis, they're then on another wait list for early interventions, different therapies. So parents are on this list sometimes for months, even a year or longer. And it's a very stressful period where they don't really know what's going on and what they can do. So Bright Coaching seeks to provide support and empower families during this difficult and vulnerable period by giving them knowledge and skills related to child development, supporting their own personal resilience, but also their family's resilience, and learning more about the healthcare system, what to expect, who the players are, and how to navigate that system. And so in this way, we really give them the confidence and the competence as caregivers in this very challenging period of their journey. So the Bright Coaching Program research project is a randomized controlled trial that we recently completed across 4 different provinces, British Columbia, Manitoba, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. And we're looking at the effectiveness of a 12-month virtual coaching intervention as compared to usual care for families on wait lists for diagnosis and/or therapies, and is meant to empower families, but we're also looking at parental stress, parents' sense of competency, and other outcomes, including costs. So this program is a manualized online program, one-to-one between the coach and a caregiver, and typically is delivered on Zoom or by telephone. And it took about 18 months to develop the content and format of the program, involving health professionals such as occupational physical therapists, nurse, psychologist, social worker, developmental pediatrician, and anthropologist. But importantly, our parent partners were very instrumental in determining the content and format of this program. So there are 14 individual sessions with the coach, as well as online resources for families that want to learn more about particular areas, and an opportunity to chat online with peers to share their experiences. So our research question was to determine the effectiveness of this online coaching program for parents of preschoolers with emerging developmental delays. And these children were between 18 months and 4 years of age. So there are many, many ways that the parent partners helped us to ensure the success of this program. So just to highlight a few of the ways that changed as a result of the input of our parent partners. So beginning with our consent form, it was carefully reviewed to ensure that it was user-friendly and understandable by parents. The parent partners helped us develop the script by the research assistants, who first contact potential participants to describe the program to make sure it's understandable and highlights the key elements. They developed the pamphlet for the program and developed different recruitment strategies beyond the ones that researchers typically use going to clinics and so forth. So including social media, for example, and a video that was developed by our parents to explain to potential parents of the program what the program was all about. They helped us in the selection of outcome measures and determined what should be the primary outcome measure. Importantly, so many of the assessments are self-report, and typically researchers begin with sociodemographics, and our parent partners said that we should really not start with that because those are questions that make people a bit uncomfortable, to put that later in the sequence. And for questions such as parent education, total family income, to explain why we're asking those questions so that they're more comfortable giving those that type of information. So that really changed our sequence of online assessments. We had looked at 2 potential platforms to deliver the program and the resources, and our parents didn't like either platform, so we came up with a third together with them. They were extremely instrumental in developing the intervention itself in terms of what they wish they knew while they were waiting for diagnosis and for therapies. So in terms of the topics, but also the format and the manuals that are provided to families and to coaches, looking at the exercises and the content to have just right amount of information. They're involved in the analysis, which is currently underway, in determining what variables we should place close attention on in terms of their relationship with the outcomes, and are helping us in interpreting some of the information, which, we have different perspectives, and certainly that comes through in the interpretation of the results. They're also involved in mobilizing the knowledge, in determining which papers they want to co-author with us, and how we will share this information ultimately to different target users. So I just wanted to show you an example of the video that was developed by our parent partners to explain the project to participants.
The Bright Coaching Program is one for parents who have children awaiting assessments or interventions for developmental concerns. And that's a really, really vulnerable time for families. So this program is designed to support them through that and to help them move from just surviving the anxiety and the stress that can come with waiting for services and help them really thrive as a family.
It made me appreciate my own resourcefulness a bit more, because I had never really thought about all of the things that I was doing for my family.
Having that support through the Bright Coaching Program allowed me to slow down, think about it, and then make the right decisions.
I think the Bright Coaching Program can have a tremendous impact on parents' lives and really make them feel empowered during a time when things can be very difficult and challenging for them.
It supported us in enjoying our life more.
It's a tool that teaches you how to think. It doesn't tell you what to think, which I think is really valuable, because it means that it gives you useful skills that you can then go on and apply to your situation, no matter what, like no matter where you are in your journey.
It's all about doing the best with our children and our families and our marriage, and that's exactly what we needed.
The tools that I learned in the program are immensely useful. They've really given me confidence in parenting a child with developmental delays.
Research is how we're going to move things forward. It's how we're going to learn what works for families and what doesn't, and how we're really going to fine-tune the programs and services that we rely on. I wish we'd had it when my kids were small.
I would absolutely recommend the Bright Coaching Program. I think it suits lots of different types of families, lots of different types of parents. I would absolutely do it again.
So now Carrie will share some of her perspectives from partner to leader as a patient partner.
Hello. So thank you all for being here. So my name is Carrie, and I started a role as one of 8 members of the parent advisory for Bright Coaching. And why did I get started? Somebody asked, and I was interested. I was intrigued. And this was a national advisory, and we met mostly over Zoom. And we had 2 main project contacts. One was a staff member in Quebec, and one was a researcher in BC at the beginning. And they created a great and open environment for all of us, most of whom were absolutely new to research, but very knowledgeable about navigating a difficult health system with our kids. And just a bit about terminology, this project works with parents because the intervention itself is for parents, but parents, patients in child health, parents are and family members and caregivers are all sort of considered patients, depending on the project and the intervention itself. So just to be super clear, I was a playwright and puppeteer for young audiences before I began this. So that was where I started my research journey as a playwright and puppeteer. I have 3 different children. My middle child is living with a profound intellectual disability and a seizure disorder, and she was just past the age range that would have been eligible for Bright Coaching when I started this. And as Amy said in the video, I wished I could have had something like this while we were waiting. I have never been a particularly patient person ever. So having a child with differences, knowing that early intervention is key, and then just having to wait was guilt-inducing, terrifying, and extremely frustrating. So when I got started on this, I wanted this program out like yesterday. So the team was great, and they really offered up a variety of ways that patients could engage. So we had sort of our meetings, but then they would always offer, and there's this to do and this to do if anyone's interested. So when the opportunity came up to review the 129-page script for the coaches, myself and another parent decided we would jump in. Sure, we'll jump in and do that. I did give a ton of feedback, most of which was implemented. And after that, I felt like I was a lot more an integral part of the project. And it all happened because they offered, and I was able to do it, and I jumped in and did it. So a year and a bit later, I became the parent liaison for the Child Bright Network. And my role here was to talk to parents across the country in all of the different 12 projects and see what was working for them in their project and in the network, what could be improved, and most importantly, what could be changed. And parents could see the changes that we made because of their feedback, from having different surveys, because the ones that we originally had in the first few years were really difficult for patients and parents to fill out. And other things like considering that patients might want some sort of direct connection to the network as well as just through project staff. And this work really gave me great insight into what works with engaging parents and how our team was doing this really well. So I now work full-time at the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba, and I work with children, youth, and parents to support their involvement as meaningful partners in the research process. And in the past few years, I have also become co-investigators and co-primary investigators on several projects, including moving into that role for Bright Coaching. And all of it started from a really great experience meeting 6 times a year on a patient advisory for Bright Coaching. I do want to dispel one thing right away. This is not all about training and capacity building. These words and ideas get used when inviting patients into research projects, and I'll have to admit I have a love-hate relationship with training in this realm. So first, if patients need to be trained to be engaged, you will only have voices around the table who have the time and capacity to complete that training, greatly limiting your diversity around the table. Number two, we are parents or patients, if you're talking about children, youth in this space, with lived and living experience. The training we get isn't all of a sudden going to allow us to jump onto 17 different research projects and make a career out of it, because unless those projects, for me, unless those projects are relevant to what my child has, the diagnosis, or in my case, non-diagnosis that my child has, I can't actually be on their patient advisory. So for most people, this isn't a job. This is something they do to make the world a better place for the families that come after them. And I have to admit, there is more than once in my research journey that was, and often still is, fueled by anger at a system that leaves so many behind. And this isn't just in research, this is more fundamentally in healthcare. And I don't think I'm the only one fueled by sort of anger, or at least a desire to make change. And I have to admit, I am very privileged to have the energy and ability to advocate for what my daughter needs. And I understand somewhat, some days, the political systems in which we work and how to use it. Although, full disclosure, my 15-year-old kid has to help me navigate the social media world because I don't really understand anything about that. But as a family, we usually can make it work. And not everybody has that. And I have to admit, some days I don't have the energy to fight anymore. And if you have to put on top of that, worry about putting food on the table or preventing your kid from harming themselves or someone else, or your kid's not getting a great education right now, everything else gets put on hold. So, and if you can't add one more list that on top of the things you need to think about, that should be okay. So that idea of training and capacity building on top of the ask to engage in research, to attend that meeting, to really try and make that change seems unnecessary to me. Now, that being said, some patients want to be trained, are super interested, and can do it. And absolutely, if that is the case, go for it. For some patients, it makes them feel more comfortable and confident in meetings, and they love it. By all means, offer it. But training isn't the only way, nor do I think is it likely the most effective way to create safe spaces for parents and patients to engage in a project. So, Bright Coaching, let's go back to that one. What they got right that I think allowed me to step up and move sort of up into the different aspects of the project. So first of all, it was someone's job. They had time and energy to do it, or at least it seemed to us they had the time and energy to do it. Whether they actually did or not, I'm not sure. And I learned from talking to parents across the country, it also helps if they're good at it, if they're honestly interested and curious. If you are doing patient engagement, really think about who on your team can do it well. And if you don't have anyone, then you need to think about adding to your team. Because not everyone is great. Just like not everyone is great at statistics, not every researcher or coordinator or research assistant has the tools in their toolbook or the personality to do patient engagement well, and that's okay. Recognize your team's strengths, use them to the best of your ability, and pick the people carefully that are going to engage with your patients. In Bright Coaching, both the staff member and researcher who initially connected with our group were caring, honest, and really willing to learn from us. They didn't say no. They didn't justify. They took our suggestions, wrote them down, and really considered them. Looking back, we made some terrible suggestions and some brilliant ones, but they were all treated with respect and considered. And when it was a fundamental suggestion that couldn't be implemented for whatever reason, it was explained to us. In the next meeting, it was explained to us why that couldn't happen. Because none of us around the table were in it to be right. We were in it to make it better, and we were in it to feel heard. And I know that sounds simple, but it is really not easy to take weeks and maybe even years of work into a meeting with people who maybe don't understand the work that went into it, or don't understand the academic world, or don't understand ethics, and take all of their suggestions and consider them and say yes to as many as you can. That's not simple. It's actually really, really hard. So we're sort of a bit on our journey into phase 2. So phase 2 is in our Bright Coaching journey is one that is focused on implementation science and knowledge mobilization. So, okay, first, knowledge mobilization. So many people may have heard of that. So that's where we get the stuff we learned, in this case, the Bright Coaching program, into action in the real world. In this case, ideally, having the coaching program available for free to any family who wants it in 4 provinces. But implementation science was new to me. And to be honest, pretty new to some of the researchers as well. Maybe that is part of the reason that it was easier to step up to a leadership role at this moment. That, and I think by now Annette realized she really couldn't get rid of me, so she had no choice. But really, I was lucky enough at the time that my job involved getting onto the implementation science on a couple of different projects. So I was able to go to those daytime training sessions and learn a little bit about it. So here is my Coles Notes version for those of you who are old enough to know what Coles Notes are. I realized when I used that phrase with my daughter the other day, apparently they don't really exist anymore. So implementation science is the science behind moving knowledge, be that research, lived experience, clinician knowledge, or other ways of knowing, into action in practice. So that's knowledge mobilization. Implementation science researches that knowledge mobilization, how it happens, and if it works. So implementation science researchers how knowledge mobilization works, kinda, sorta. Anyway, implementation science gives us theories and frameworks that help us figure out strategies to help overcome barriers that might be a problem and use facilitators, things that might make it easier to get that Bright Coaching program into practice in these 4 provinces. So in our case, the first thing we needed to do was adapt the script and the manual based on feedback from our initial study. So we knew that at the end of the study, we asked participants for feedback, and based on that feedback, we're currently looking at adaptations and some of it will be for all provinces, like changing the color schemes and the visuals, making the visuals more inclusive of all types of families. Others may be specific to local context in a province, depending on what each province needs. And we have these adaptations started, and we will have focus groups with various stakeholders to assess the proposed changes we have to that script, to the manual, to those color schemes, that kind of thing. And those focus groups will be made up of a mix of caregivers, administrations from organizations that might use the coaching program for clients on their wait list, policymakers, funders, clinicians, anyone else we can identify that might help us make this happen. So we will ask the focus groups about also what might prevent us or what might help us from putting our program into practice in each one of these 4 provinces. For example, the easy one is always funding for the person to give the coaching session. Another one is there a central wait list for the province that we can use to figure out what families might benefit from this? Or does each organization within the province have a different wait list? So we need to be getting to a whole bunch of different organizations throughout the province. And given that we are working in 4 provinces with 4 different health and service systems, each province is likely going to have different barriers and facilitators, and therefore likely different strategies we need to put our coaching program into practice. So we will have a lot of barriers and facilitators to map to strategies, which might be different in each of the 4 provinces we are working on. So it gets complicated, but doable, we hope. I'll pass it back to you, Annette. I realized I had a slide here, but that was our barriers to facilitator slide, but I forgot to move it. Over to you, Annette.
Hey, thanks, Carrie. I just love your energy. It's really infectious. So I just want to highlight the key points about the researcher perspective on how to do patient-oriented research. What are some of the key paths forward to make it happen successfully? Next slide, please. So the CIHR SPORE program has guiding principles which are helpful just in terms of principles. So it's important to be inclusive, to include patient partners or parent partners that are really diverse in terms of their lived experience, to be sure that your project will be relevant to Canadians as a whole, to provide the support, the safe environment, but also education. And this is part of the training piece. There is that actual experience of doing, but it is helpful sometimes to reflect on the experience through, could be an hour module or sharing experience among patient partners of what went well and what didn't go well. So there is different educational opportunities, and it's also very important for our researchers to have some training and understanding of what it really means to engage patients in authentic ways. Compensation is also key, and ChildBright can assist both with training and compensation. Families are not, this is not part of their day job to do this, so it's important to compensate them for their time. Mutual respect, really showing how you value the input provided and recognize the changes that are made to the project because of what parents said. So not only listening, but feeling heard and having an impact is really important. And really you're co-building the project together. So you're working together from beginning to end to make sure that the project is successful. So it is hard to do this. It is not something that comes easily to researchers who like to control their situation in their lab. It takes more time to do this, much more time. It's intimidating for patient partners to join a research team that are using their jargon and talking about things where they're the majority in the team and you have a few patient partners as part of that team. There's a lot to learn both for researchers and patient partners. Most of our patient partners never were part of research projects when we began. Mistakes happen and you have to acknowledge the mistake and learn from it. You need to be flexible in terms of the patient partners are not always available. They have their personal lives, and there are experiences where sometimes they need to disconnect and maybe come back or not. So that you need to understand that you can't demand or expect them to always be available. And you want to be sure you have a diverse voices in terms of your patient partners. So it is hard, but it is worth it. And so in terms of time, it's important to put it in your timeline. So if initially you were writing a grant with for 3 years, I would add a year and make it a 4-year grant to properly plan for the time needed to engage patients throughout the project. We've used a parent advisory panel, so parents are the majority in that group, together with our coordinator and perhaps a researcher, and we go back and forth to them to ask questions and ask for input at various stages of the project. There's a lot to learn. ChildBright can help provide consultation, youth consultation, parent consultation, training initiatives and so forth, lots of blogs and tip sheets. When there are mistakes, you should acknowledge it, discuss it, learn together. It's very important not to shy away from it. It's, it's a continuous learning process. In terms of flexibility, we've had many more patient partners. So for Bright Coaching, we began with about 8 parent partners across 4 provinces. And at any given time, only a subset might have been available to meet or to discuss. And that way you still have several voices to learn from. So overall, I would say it requires commitment and effort, but it's really worth the effort because you end up with a project that's of better quality and much more relevant in terms of health and healthcare. So there are numerous tip sheets that were developed by our patient partners that you can see under the Citizen Engagement Program tab. So these are tip sheets for parents, partners, for youth partners, and for researchers. And they describe the roles and expectations and responsibilities of all the members of the team. I think they can be very helpful before starting a project. There are also various blogs on the benefits and challenges of patient engagement and also the effect of the pandemic on engagement. And these different blogs provide different tips at the end. We also have a training program, so please sign up to our newsletter and you can see what we have available and join us as part of the process.
So back to me. So patients and parents and caregivers and family members can really be an untapped source of inspiration, dedication, and ideas, but really only if they feel valued. And that value often comes from connection. As Annette said, compensation, pieces like that, making sure at the beginning, it was really helpful to have more parents in the room than there was research staff. Now I often attend meetings where I'm the only parent, and that's okay now because that has grown over time. That confidence, that ability, and also the respect between all the different team members has grown over time. So one tip I do want to give that I've learned over the years is really practice asking questions without judgment or leading. I work a lot with students, and the most common thing we work on with any of my patient advisors is how do you go into a situation and really take out your bias? Like when you're dealing with you, take out the bias that they may have started on to take over their healthcare when they may have not, because those questions, those biases, and the way you ask the question can really lead a patient partner down a path that may not have been the path that they might initially go. Now, a lot of advisory groups will say, it's easier for me if you give me the document and then I'll give feedback. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But also consider how you can, maybe in the meeting before, ask a few questions to make sure you get some answers and direction, not based on your initial ideas. So it's not giving feedback on your ideas, but really trying to dig into theirs. Present data and ask them for their thoughts and reflections before sharing their own. Sometimes that takes a little giving of context and things like that, and it takes a little bit more work in planning, but really thinking about how you can approach those questions without leading parents or patients along. Ironically, Annette talked about it taking longer with parents, and that is true. But I also will tell you that I often hear from parents or patients that they want quicker change. They want the research to happen now. They want it to be, well, okay, it's good. Come on, why isn't it not in practice now? So don't be worried if you are a researcher and every 4 or 5 years you have some turnover if it's a long-term project. That is okay. You really want to focus on trying to keep at least some of your core group there throughout the whole project, but also having new parents come into a project is not a bad thing, having that turnover. Because you know what? People will leave your project for other advocacy work, other priorities in their lives. So it's really I usually suggest to do exit interviews to make sure that it's not something about the project that you might be able to change to retain them, but also making sure things like keeping people updated. Even if there is nothing to do for your patient partners. This is so important. I talk to so many parents during the recruitment phase. They're like, oh yeah, I'm still on that project, but I don't know. I think maybe I got dropped off the email list or something, because there would be months and months where they wouldn't hear because it was just recruitment was like plugging along, right? And sometimes that can be months, sometimes it can be years of recruitment. And if you don't email those patient partners every couple of months to say, hey, how's it going? Even if it's, keep it short if there's nothing to say, so nobody has to read much, but really just to keep that connection of going, we're still in recruitment. This is where we are numbers wise, things like that. Really meet patients and parents where they need to be, and understand that this might change over the course of the project. You will have, Zanette mentioned, you will have people coming in and out depending. And also what really helped us is that the staff member would have one-on-one conversations with us each year. And the second thing is if somebody missed a meeting, she would reach out and say, hey, do you want to do a one-on-one? So she would have that meeting with that person one-on-one based on their schedule. Super helpful, because then people, if something happened during the day, they couldn't make a meeting, or they knew they couldn't make a meeting, then they would just have a one-on-one with the staff member after that. Continue to reach out and offer different ways to engage and different types of engagement. That's how I ended up where I was. They said, hey, does anyone want to do this? Probably thinking that nobody would want to read a 129-page document, but I did. It was fun. And if you remember nothing else, it's really think about, how do you make patient partners part of the whole project, not just the parts you think you need them for. You can't get feedback from patients if you don't invite them into certain parts of the project. And it's easy to think that you know what parts will be useful to consult with patients on. But because of those assumptions, you might miss out on an important opportunity to make the research better and more relevant to the families who will hopefully benefit from it. Thank you so much to all of the funders who support our Bright Coaching project, as well as Child Bright Network in general. And I will throw up a couple of links there, which we will also throw in the chat. But it is now over to you and your turn. We can answer questions. We can... Any comments?
So we do have a couple of questions for you. And thank you, first of all, for a great presentation. There's been some chat in the background. It's clear that several people are really what you're saying is resonating with them, and they're commenting that way. While I get the questions sorted out, I want to thank you both for the presentation, and Jose is going to launch a poll. You'll have to answer all 5 questions in order to submit. And while you are doing that, I will pose some of these questions. So Taryn asks, what skills or training would you look for when asking someone on your team to lead patient engagement?
So I could start, and then Carrie will continue, because I think the next question is really particularly related to something Carrie mentioned about bias. So, you want someone who's going to be open, honest, a listener, and really understand those principles of the SPORE, really understand what patient-oriented research is all about. So what we did is we had our research coordinator together with one of our researchers who was also a parent. So we found that was a really good combination. But then, we had a lot of flexibility. So there were many times when different members of the group would join together and speak. So it was it was something that was more iterative, but for sure, you want someone who is going to actually listen, be respectful, honest, and open, and really be there to help represent and to help bring the links from researcher to patient partner and back. But Carrie, you might have something more to add.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a skill. It is a skill. I watched it as a playwright. I watched a playwright for young audience, David Craig, sit in a room full of teachers to give feedback on his play. That he did a reading before it was going to be, released in the fall, kind of thing, as it was sort of marketing, but also to give feedback. And I watched him just like write everything down, nod and smile happily. Everything. I'm like, how, okay, because he had worked years. This was 3 years. This play was 3 years in the making. He'd, talked to youth. He'd done a great job of really working on this play. He didn't make a lot of changes, but those teachers felt heard. They all booked the show. So it is a skill to be able to listen, hear, and not go, well, but I did that because some youth told me this. To really hear and consider it and go, is there a way that I can implement this? Even if ethics won't let me do it the way that the parent is suggesting, how can I ask questions to get to the bottom of what they're trying to solve? And by getting to the bottom of what they're trying to solve, then you can try and solve it. So it really is about that kind of that ability to not justify, which is really hard. And really trying to dig in. So a lot of it's just about curiosity. It's about being good with people. And it's about being understanding, because parents sometimes will get off topic and start talking about their lives. And so the ability to gently guide us along, or put enough time in to be able to do both. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's great. Michelle asks, can you give us an example of asking a question with bias versus without bias?
All right. So the one that most recently comes to mind, because I was just working with a student on a survey, and we brought it to our youth advisory council. And one of the first questions was like, the way that you've asked the questions, if I have not started, and most of them had not. So this was about transition services. And so the questions were all about, how was your transition to adult care? How was it approached? How have you started taking over for your taking control of your own health care? So the problem is that the youth on the council kind of looked at this and went, but if I haven't started taking over for my own health care, I can't answer any of your questions. So the first question, so we figured it out in the research with the researcher and the student, and they basically said, the first question you need to ask is, have you started taking over anything for your own healthcare? Because if they haven't, then all of the next questions become, how do you want? How do you, or what are the steps that you think need to happen so that you can start? So it's a lot of it's about just making sure you're not walking in with an assumption that they've started. So it wasn't a big tweak, but it was a huge tweak for those maybe younger, maybe not. Some 17-year-olds still had not, when we did the actual interview, some 17-year-olds still were not taking over responsibility for their own healthcare. So it was a big tweak. So that's a really clear example of sort of how our bias, the assumption from the researcher's point of view, is that all of them had started in some way, shape, or form, or that they even understood what that meant. They understood. So she had examples of what sort of some of taking, if they weren't sure what taking over your own healthcare meant. So that's sort of a very clear example.
Wonderful, thank you. Tara asks, what's the cost of your program manuals?
Well, we don't have a cost yet. Hopefully they'll be free. And hopefully the program will be free. Let us know where you are, and you can email us, because if you're in one of the provinces we're already working on, then hopefully we can connect and figure out a way that you can know how it's sort of going, and how we're implementing. And then if we're not, we're always looking for new places that we'll expand to in the next sort of round. So please let us know.
Just to supplement, we are doing a health economic analysis of the program. So looking at what are the costs of delivering the program, but more importantly, what are the costs to families who were part of the intervention versus those who were in the control group on wait lists, and seeing what services were offered and what they sought out publicly and privately. What's important about the program is it's not just about reading a manual to understand, okay, this is the way I can promote my child's development. The coaching intervention is about empowering families. So the coaches are trained in advance of the program into using motivational interviewing techniques, empowering techniques to really give parents more control over their situation, and with the knowledge, have more a sense of competence and confidence as caregivers during challenging periods. So the idea is not just to know what to do in that moment, but to really help support caregivers throughout their journey going forward, and getting those skills of being more in control. And so, so for example, our coaches are supervised by a senior coach who is a social worker with a lot of experience. So the coaches get one-on-one in going through difficult cases or situations and how they can learn from that. But also the coaches get together and discuss different situations together. So it's really the coaching techniques in additional to the content that is critical, I believe, in terms of empowering families and giving them that sense of competency moving forward. Not just, what do I do today with my child? But we're hoping to, through this implementation science project, we're hoping to understand how to integrate this program as part of a public healthcare system, so for free, in the various provinces. And given that every province has a different healthcare system, different way of organizing it, we may find that we'll be using different ways to integrate and implement this program in each of the provinces. So stay tuned.
Folks are waiting with bated breath now. Ibrahim asks, Carrie, from your shift as a patient to a leader, what qualifies you to have what qualities do you have to work on the most and improve yourself?
Remember how I said I was really bad at patience? That is what I had to work on the most.
It's on a lot of our lists.
It is on a lot of our lists, but I think for me it's in and not responding right away, because the quick response is usually anger. And it can be anger at the system, because the ethics is like, board is like fighting this silly thing that you're like, how can this be the thing that dies? Like, how can this be it? That seems so ridiculous. Sometimes it's at time, how long it takes. So for me, that's the really careful thing. I need to not respond right away and make sure that my response, even if that anger is still there, I'm able to curb it. And, yeah. So because because many of the issues are personal for my family, I think it can be harder to not respond viscerally sometimes. So that's something that I need to work on in my life in general. But sometimes that anger is very, very useful in a lot of advocacy work and things like that. So it's not about not using it, or having it. It's about making sure that your initial response, you are a little more thoughtful than I used to be.
Fair. Another question from an anonymous poster. Would you talk more about the adaptation process happening in phase 2? How are you trying to keep active ingredients of the intervention while adapting to specific contexts, which is a key to spread and scale and implementation science, of course?
Yeah, we're in it right now. So we're working with we're bringing in implementation science experts people who have expertise in implementation science as a research approach to each of the research projects, which has been really helpful. And thinking about, first of all, the first phase of this project in the implementation piece is looking at what were the key ingredients, understanding what the key ingredients to success were, and what were some of the things that we may want to alter to enhance the program. So these are not things that really alter content so much, but are making it more feasible, more appropriate, more acceptable. So that's the first phase we're in right now. We're working with patient partners and other stakeholders to understand better what are those things that we need to maintain, and some of the minor adjustments like the graphics, being more diverse as an example, or better that our recruitment message, it should be clear that the focus is on parent intervention, not child intervention. So little things that we see that contributed to, let's say, people withdrawing from the project. And then going to each province and bringing in the key decision makers for that province who are very involved in early identification, early intervention for children with developmental delays, and working with them to determine what is the best strategy for integration in the province. So not to come with a cookie cutter approach, but rather work with the people in the front line and policymakers, possibly donors, to see what is the best way to implement in a particular province. So that's the approach that we're taking. So let me know if that answers your question.
Yeah, a lot of the current adaptations are sort of more about the skin, how it looks, how it feels, as opposed to the actual content. Although there are some that the coaches and the participants said, we don't need that one. You know, we don't need that particular chapter. And that was just, it meant the coaches sort of skipped it. So there were some sort of practical things that we learned. Of course, you're going to learn when you have 350 people going through a program or 300 people going through a program. And then there will be some that are going to be a little trickier. And so there might have to be a go back to evaluation. Here in Manitoba, I know we're looking very closely at working with an Indigenous advisory to look at how to expand some of the language that we've used in the program to include sort of other ways of knowing. We're not, this program is not going to be focused on going on to a reserve or a First Nations community, but because of the population base in Manitoba, about 20% of the people who end up on wait lists are going to end up being Indigenous. And so they might end up in the program. So we just want to make sure that we can reflect as many different ways of thinking about childhood differences, childhood disabilities as possible, so that people can see themselves in that program. So a lot of it's about expanding it a little bit. And like I said, changing the skin.
And I see Sarah mentioned the important work that CanChild is doing also in family engagement. They have a great course on family engagement. So that's the other thing is that we need to all work together towards common goals. We are hoping to develop a patient-oriented research toolkit for child health researchers. So not just children with disabilities, but all child health research. And there are many wonderful tools out there, such as CanChild's course that could be highlighted. So really pulling together those resources to make them much more available and accessible in formats that are user-friendly to researchers. So that is something that Child Bright is working on right now as part of the citizen engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chelsea, if you just email Hannah at info@brightcoaching.ca, we can get connected and talk more about how Bright Coaching might fit eventually into where you're working at BCI Kids. So just it's info@brightcoaching.ca. And then we can connect more.
Thank you so much, both of you, Annette and Carrie. It's the end of our time together, and I'm sad to say that because there's been a fair bit of engagement on the line. But we want to thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. We want to thank our audience members for attending, for sharing your time and your talent with this group, and for your questions and comments. They really enrich the discussion. Upcoming on Spark Conversations, our next episode of the podcast series will be Health System Leadership, Leading Beyond Complexities to Effectively Transform Health Systems. We've already launched this podcast and it's now available on our website. Dr. Catherine Smart, our host, speaks with our special guest, Dr. Michael Gardam. On Spark Live, the webinar series, and May 31st, we're excited to bring you another webinar in collaboration with ChildBright, Children's Mental Health, Research Messages for Informing Policy with Charlotte Waddell, Director of the Children's Health Policy Center. And next month in June, our Spark theme is Child and Youth Mental Health. And we're bringing you two webinars, one on June 14th, Stemming the Tide, Investing Early in Mental Health of Ontario's 7 to 12-year-olds, with folks from the Knowledge Institute for Child and Youth Mental Health and Addictions. And on June 21st, Child and Youth Mental Health, Parental Concerns about Children's Learning, Development, and Mental Health with Dr. Caitlin Bryant of the Mary J. Wright Child and Youth Development Clinic at Western University. As I mentioned, it's always great if you can watch live, as your questions and comments really enrich the discussion. But if you can't, the recordings of these sessions are made available after the fact on our website. Thanks again for joining us today. Thanks to Carrie and Annette for this presentation, and hopefully we'll see many of you back here in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.